Hey guys, my name is Haley and today we're doing the mid-year book freakout tag. It has been a while since I've done this tag, obviously, because it's been a while since I've filmed any sit down, just stand here and talk to the camera video, literal years. I actually had to go back and remind myself of all of the questions of everybody who's been doing it, and I was like, oh my god, it is time for that tag. I can do that. That's an easy tag to do. So here we are. We're gonna jump right on into it. Just as a preface, I have read 86 books this year, which I feel like is a lot for June for me in the last couple of years. The last 2 or so years especially, I have not read as many books as I was reading in years previously, so I was kind of surprised that I had already read that many books. But I also feel like I've read a lot more shorter books than I usually do, so that could be part of the reason. But we're going to jump right on into the questions. Let's go. The first question is obviously the hardest one of all. What is your favorite book that you've read so far this year? I have had 3 or 4 books in the running since I read each of them, and I cannot choose between the 4 of them, so I'm just going to name all of them and not make any decisions whatsoever about what the number 1 is. Again, these are in no particular order. I'm just obsessed with all of them. The first of those being The Invocations by Crystal Sutherland. This one really, really, really surprised me. One, because I have tried to read House of Hollow, I think, once before, and I couldn't get into it, so I literally got rid of the book. And now I'm regretting that decision because I loved her new book so much. This is a queer paranormal horror, I think would be the best way to describe it. And it's this group of 3 girls. They all have their own perspectives, and they are trying to solve this mystery of a witch who keeps cursing people, and they end up with the way the magic works in this is that you get tattoos, and that does different things to your magic or gives you the ability to use different types of magic, and there is somebody going around killing a bunch of witches. This is so much queer rage, so much feminine rage. It was such a big surprise for me because I had no idea what this book was about going into it. I just really wanted the special edition, the Evernight or whatever it is special edition with the skeleton on the side, which is why I decided to read it, and I'm so glad that I did. But also, if anybody knows where to get that special edition for less than $100 that is everywhere on Mercari, please let me know because I need it. This is obviously one of my favorite books of the year. Another contender is The Spirit Bears Its Teeth by Andrew Joseph White, that's his name. And this is a historical fiction, but it's a paranormal historical fiction. And it is about our trans main character who ends up in a finishing school / sanatorium, and it's because his parents want him to be this perfect wife for a suitor, and he refuses. He is constantly telling them that he is not a girl, and it is just the most heart-wrenching queer read. Please check trigger warnings for this, because I cried several times just from the queer representation alone and how often this happens to people. But it's also very paranormal, which I really like. I've always wanted to read this because of the cover. The cover is stunning. And I did read Andrew Joseph White's other book last year, Hell Follow With Us. And he has another one coming out later this year that I'm really excited for. But this one blew me away. It was the first thing I had annotated, at least tabbed. I didn't fully annotate it yet. And it was one of the first books in a long time that I had actually wanted to annotate because that is just not something that I've been doing the last couple of years. And this book broke me. The paranormal aspects of this are so interesting. There's this thing called the veil sickness that is turning these violet-eyed women mad. And that's a whole thing in this. There's a whole found family thing with the people that he meets in the sanatorium, and it is perfection. I'm obsessed with it. I have forced this upon several people. Several of my friends have read it because of me and cried their eyeballs out as well. But again, that is contender 2. Contender number 3 is really pushes its way to number 1 often, but I can't choose between the 4 of them, and I just won't. But that is Godly Heathens. This is a duology. This is the special edition. It's signed, and I've become obsessed with this author. They have another series that I'm really interested in that I'm hoping to get to this month because I did not get to it during Pride Month. But I don't even know how to explain this book because it's wild. It is about a non-binary teen who lives in the South. So as you might imagine, there's a bunch of homophobia going on there. And they have this friend who lives in New York City who they FaceTime with all the time, who I was obsessed with. And then this new girl comes to town and they start having these visions and these dreams that don't make any sense to them, as if they have another life, and then everything unfolds from there. I will say it involves gods, as you might guess from the title, Godly Heathens. And I flew through this duology so fast. Like, I want to reread it. I read it so fast because I was obsessed with it. I was obsessed with our main character. I was obsessed with all of the love interests, because there is some poly queer representation in here as well. This is like one of my new favorite things. And I desperately want to be friends with the author because I am so interested in the world that they built. I also love this special edition, and I need them to come out with a special edition of the second book so I can have a pretty little matching set. I think there was an Illumicrate one of the set that came out that I did not have the money for when they released it, so I'm hoping I can find those on Mercari for a decent price when people actually start to get them. And then also in the running was one of the first things I became obsessed with this year, and that is the Nine Knits Moon series by Piper CJ. Piper CJ has like shot to the top of my favorite authors list because I read her whole series in the span of like a month, and I pre-ordered her new book, which is later on in this stack. But this is a queer fantasy, sapphic queer fantasy, for people searching for a sapphic queer fantasy that is not Prior of the Orange Tree or any sort of queer fantasy with religious trauma specifically. The religious trauma in this was so real and so relatable for me that I was like sobbing anytime it was brought up. And I loved both of our main female leads. They were fantastic. This world is so interesting about these two girls who grew up in an orphanage together, and then one day when they're like, I think they're preteens or like teenagers, one of the girls finds out that she is more special than she thought, and she goes off, and it is them constantly trying to get back together with each other and like reunite their, not only their friendship but their love for each other. And there are so many other characters represented in this. There's a bunch of poly relationships in this. I loved it so much. I can't even explain the depths of this story, but if you're a fantasy reader and you have not read this, please do. If you're looking for more queer fantasy, this is it right here. The whole series is out. I read the whole series before the fourth book came out, and then immediately read the fourth book, and I had the time of my life, and I cannot wait for Piper CJ's other book. She has another one coming out later this year, I believe is the one that is a prequel for this series of a villain origin story. And then she has another book that just came out that I have not read yet, but I'm planning to read soon, which is another one of the questions on here. But those are my favorites of the year, and no, you cannot make me pick which one is number one because I can't. Then we have best sequel you've read this year. And as I just said, I read that whole series, and I think my favorite of the series is the second book, which is The Sun and Its Shade. This one really got me. There were a lot of like specifically like queer queer like almost reminiscent scenes of like Harry Potter. So if you're a Harry Potter fan and refuse to reread the series because of J.K. Rowling and struggle because that series was a big part of your identity, but now you're queer and she's a terrible human being, read this series. Because there were like almost direct parallels, and I don't know if Piper did them on purpose, but there were almost direct parallels in this series of like specifically the one I remember very vividly of like a Department of Ministries scene. There's a scene where they are like in a similar like place, and it gave me such Department of Ministries and Order of the Phoenix, and I ate it off. But yes, I believe this is the best sequel, but you can include the entire rest of the series. Are definitely the best sequels that I've read this year. Number 3 is what is a new release that you haven't read yet but want to get to, and that is her newest book, The Deer and the Dragon. I know this is about demons. The character art for the two main characters is beautiful, and I believe this also has a ton of religious trauma because that's kind of just what Piper CJ writes, which is right up my alley. So I really need to get to this. Also, the edition is stunning with the sprayed edges. I'm hoping to get to this soon. Question number 4 is what is the most anticipated book of the second half of the year? Is that what it is? Yes, most anticipated book for the second half of the year. And I have 2. I have Compound Fracture by Andrew Joseph White, which, as you heard me rave earlier, The Spirit Bears Its Teeth was one of my favorite books of the year, and this is his new book that comes out this fall. I'm very excited. I already have it pre-ordered. And then the other one, if it's not obvious, is Piper's new book, which is A Chill in the Flame, which also comes out this fall, and I already have it pre-ordered. I'm very excited for both of those. Question number 5 is, what is the biggest disappointment of the year? And I had 2 that were like second books in the series that I really, really liked last year. One of my favorite books of last year was A Soul to Keep by Opal Rain. Loved it. Top 10 favorite books of the year. So I read the sequel, which is the second book of like a 5 or 6 book series called A Soul to Heal. And I just really didn't like this, and it was for a very specific reason, and that is I hate the accidental pregnancy trope. It like gives me the heebie-jeebies and makes me angry. So that was the entire point of this book, and I didn't know that because I didn't read the synopsis, so it was my own fault not knowing that that was a trope in here. Which, there were parts of this book I really liked. Like, I really liked the world that Opal Rain has created with this, but this, I gave this like 2, maybe 3 stars. I think I gave it 2 stars because I hate the accidental pregnancy trope, and that was this entire book. And then, along the same vein, not even like, I want to say I read these within like 2 weeks of each other, accidentally not realizing it was the same trope. I read War by Laura Thalassa, also Pestilence, read it earlier this year, loved it. So excited to read the rest of the series, and the only reason I haven't is because I hated this book. This is an apocalyptic series where like it literally follows like pestilence, war, death, and famine. And this one is just, the whole second half of the book is like an accidental pregnancy trope, and I was like, no, how did I do this? And I did it twice in the same month. So those were the biggest disappointments for me this year. Which I learned I should probably at least read the first sentence or 2 of a synopsis. Maybe I would know what the tropes were. Question number 6 is the biggest surprise of the year so far. I have 2 of those. The first one being The Love Hypothesis. I remember when this book came out. I think it was before I started reading romance, so I really didn't care about it. But I remember everybody and their mother reading this and loving it. And even over the last couple of years that she came out with other books, loving Allie Hazelwood's other books. I think the only one people don't like is Live on the Brain, and that was also the one I didn't like. Because after reading this and adoring it, like I loved it, I read it like it was crack. Like I flew through this. I went over the next like 2 weeks and read every single one of Allie Hazelwood's books. Which I did not expect to happen. The only one I haven't read is her new one that just came out. But this one remains my favorite of her books. I think this one and Check and Mate have been my favorites. I also really liked Love Theoretically. I didn't really care for Bride, and I didn't care for Love on the Brain. And I haven't read Not in Love yet. But this made me like go on a whole rampage of reading all of her books. So this one really, really shocked me because I did not think Allie Hazelwood would be an author that I really liked, and turns out she is. Then my other biggest surprise of the year is Mary by Nat Cassidy. I picked this up because I've heard about it again since it came out. I picked it up in a used bookstore, like a little indie bookstore. And I was like, I remember hearing a lot about that, and that is really creepy. And literally the seller, when they sold it to me in the bookstore, was like, do you like horror? Like, do you like really like extreme horror? And I was like, yeah. And she was like, good, because I tried to read this and it was so scary that I couldn't, and I put it down. So I was like, oh. And I sat down intending to read like maybe the first couple chapters of this just because I had just finished the book. And I stayed up until the middle of the night and read this entire book in like a sitting and a half. I think I only got up once to like eat. This was such a well-paced horror book. I cannot even like fathom or like explain to you how well-paced this was, how interesting it was. This is a book I've recommended to most people who have also read it and become obsessed with this author. I think he only has like 1 other book, and I've been on the library hold list for it for forever, and I can't find it in stores, so I might end up having to give it and get it from Amazon. But I loved this so much. Again, I tabbed it. I have not been annotating anything, but I tabbed the crap out of this book, and I read it in the span of a couple hours, and this is like a 400-page horror book. I was so shocked by how much I love this, and this is also in the running for my favorite books of the year, like top 10, very easily. Question number 7 is new favorite authors. You're about to hear me repeat several authors. I feel like it's obvious from this entire video, but Piper CJ. New favorite author. Andrew Joseph White. New favorite author. And H.E. Edgman. New favorite author. Those three, hands down, easily my new favorite authors, not only of the year, but in general, because I'm obsessed with their books. Question number 8 is fictional crush, and I always, whenever I've done this tag, and I've done it several times, like years ago when I first started my channel, because everybody does it every year, is new favorite fictional crush, and I don't know that I've ever had an answer to this question. And then I was scrolling through my Goodreads of all the books I've read this year, and I was like, is there anyone that, like, I had a crush on? Like, me personally. Not just I loved the couples together, I had a crush on. And I remembered myself kicking and squealing and giggling at a character in this. Not the main character, which is the answer to another question. But her friend, Enzo, who is, like, her best friend. They're kind of romantically involved, but they're not exclusive. And he lives in New York City. He's also queer. And I was obsessed with him. Like, every single time he was on page. And he's not on page a lot in this book. He is more in the second one for reasons. But I was in love with him. And that has not happened to me. Like, fictional crushes do not happen to me. Like, I'm a 31-year-old woman. That doesn't really happen anymore. This one really got me. Enzo really got me. Then the next question is new favorite fictional character. Jem Eccles. They are the most interesting, like, non-binary, like, just the most, like, me if I lived in the South, which I did live in the South for a short period of time and didn't enjoy it. But, like, the sassiest main character, has all the religious trauma, talks about their trauma all the time, loves queer people, really looking for their queer found family. Like, that's what Jem is in this, and I loved them so much. And their journey over the course of this duology is incredible. So, new favorite fictional character would be Jem Eccles. Books that made me cry. Oh, geez. I've cried a lot because I've read a lot of, like, religious trauma, which will always make me sob, and queer books, which also often make me sob. And that applies to both of these. We have the first one that made me sob this past month, where I, like, was literally weeping. I was like, my partner walked in and I was like, I'm so sorry, I just read the saddest book. I cannot do certain, like, queer trauma. It just destroys me. And that book is Stay Gold by Tobley Smith. I was like, oh, this is gonna be a cute little contemporary about a trans boy in high school. What usually happens to the queer people in high school in books is a lot of homophobia and, like, violence. So triggers for that in this book, because literally when the violence happened, I was weeping for, like, the last 40 pages of this book. I was so upset. Like, that type of queer trauma can't do it. You want me to read, like, the grossest, like, body horror, any other horror, like, horrific dark romance things? Sure. Queer kids having to deal with violence of rude, incredibly awful people, can't do it. I will just cry. So this book really just put me in all the feelings. And then the other book that made me sob because it hit way too close to home, like, way, I got the arc for this that I read back in April, and it just came out at the beginning of June, and that is Gay the Pray Away by Natalie Naudus. I found her on Bookstagram and saw that she was writing a sapphic religious trauma book, and I was like, I need that. I need it. As someone who has a bunch of religious trauma and really likes sapphic books and is always looking for more of them. And this book talks so much about how much of a cult this poor girl is in, how she can't get out of it. She was underage. There's a librarian that, like, helps her find queer books with, like, what's the word? With the covers that don't look like queer books. What is the word for that? Discreet. Of, like, discreet covers. Like, she literally gets a book and it's, I'm gonna start crying. she gets one last stop from the library that the librarian helps her find, even though like he knows that she's not allowed to take them out because her parents won't let her. And he lets her steal it and take it home, and she has to take the cover off of it and rip it up and like hide it inside like a Bible cover so her parents don't find it, and it like helps her discover that she likes girls. And it gives me so much hope for, I'm gonna cry, so much hope for like young queer kids, and like how important libraries and things like that are for kids whose parents are not supportive of them, to be able to learn more about themselves. Like, I genuinely want to go to her website. If I had the money, I would have done it already, and buy like 15 copies of these and put them around my somewhat conservative town, especially near all the churches and even my old church, so that teenage kids who are learning more about their sexuality and who they are as a person have something like this to read. Not only to figure out their own queerness or sexual identity or anything like that, but to realize how cult-ish a lot of religions are. And this one was very, very similar to mine, which was Apostolic Pentecostal. Like, she had to dress very, very modestly. They even went to like religious conventions, which was the thing that I did all the time. And I literally cried like literally every 20 or so pages in this. I even told my partner, I was like, I'm reading a book about religious trauma. If you see me crying, please mind your business. And he was like, okay. And like he walked in several times where I was just sobbing my eyeballs out. So yeah, I have a signed copy of it. I have a little bookmark and a little magnet, and I cannot recommend this enough to people. I did actually read this and go on a little rant about it, and on it might have been my last vlog that I posted, but I'll put that down below if you want to watch it, because I talked a lot about this book there too. But this book upset me, but in the best way possible. And then we have, on a much lighter note, a book that made me happy. And for that, I'm going to go with this whole series, but it is Dead Serious by Vaughn Cassidy. This series is so fun. I love paranormal things, if you didn't know that. And this is like just queer paranormal goodness, but also with a bunch of paranormal twists. Like, this guy literally goes to a bar for, I think it's his birthday. He chokes on an ice cube and technically dies for like a minute or two. And then when he comes back to life and is like revived by the paramedics, he can see ghosts. And he's a mortician, so he realizes while he's doing the autopsy on this person who has just been murdered, that their ghost pops up in his mortuary. And it is a drag queen, and she is very talkative. She's very involved in like getting her death solved, and this whole series is about him solving mysteries, like as many paranormal investigators, because he can see ghosts now, and he's helping the ghosts like figure out the mysteries of their deaths. But this book made me obsessed with drag queens in general. I have not read any good like books with drag queens in them, so if you have any recommendations for that, please let me know in the comments, because I need more. I love Dusty so much, who was the drag queen in this, and I loved our cast of characters. There's so much queer joy and like happiness in this, but there's also a lot of big triggers for like grief and death in this, because obviously he's solving the murders of people who have died. Several of them are queer people who were killed, like Dusty. And I binge read this whole series at the end of June, and it's become one of my new obsessions. And I'm going to read the rest of Vaughn Cassidy's and her other pen name, which I believe is Wendy Saunders. I'm going to read all of her books because this series was fantastic, and I need to own them because I don't yet, because I just read them. They're all on KU, by the way, if you want to read any more KU books. And then we have Most Beautiful Books that you bought this year. If you haven't seen me already talk about this Illumicrate edition of Takeja God is beautiful, and is what set me on my obsession with special editions. It's this book's fault that I own so many special editions and am stalking Mercari for all the more of them. And then as far as regular editions go, I love the cover of Otherworldly by F.T. Lukens. I'm so excited to read this. It's beautiful. I cannot wait. Oh, the regular book. I'm so used to special editions having something on the inside, and this one just doesn't, because it's not. It's just a regular cover. But this is my favorite regular cover that I bought this year. And then the book that I can't shut up about, Godly Heathens. It's beautiful, and I'm obsessed with it in so many different ways, but it's definitely one of the most beautiful books that I bought this year. And then the last question is, what books do you need to read before the end of the year? Obviously, the usual answer is all of them. But specifically for me, I want to read my special editions, because I keep not doing that because I'm scared to read them physically because they're stunning. So I keep having to wait on library holds or get the ebooks, which is stopping me from reading them. But I am on, like, I'm very close to a lot of my library holds for them, so I'm hoping to get to a bunch of them this month. And also another one that has been a big goal of mine that I just still haven't done this year, and I just bought another one of them, is I really want to get into Don Me, male, boys loving boys, Chinese fiction. Like, I'm not getting them out because they're stacked right here. I own a bunch of MXTX books. I own like 2 of Heaven Official's Blessings, the first 2 of Grandmaster, and then I own the entire Scumvillain's Self-Saving System. So I can read that whole series, which is probably what I'm going to start with. And then I picked up Case File Compendium when I was on my birthday weekend trip. So I have a bunch of Don May. I don't know how to pronounce it, please help me. That I want to read. And that is a big goal for the end of the year, because I've been wanting to read them since like probably early last year, and I still haven't done it. But yeah, that is all of the questions. Let me know what your favorite book that you have read so far this year is down in the comments below. Thank you all for watching, and I will see all of you guys next time.